So our lesson today from the Old Testament is kind of all over the place. It tries to tell very quickly a big chunk of the tale of Joseph, and the result is pretty confusing. So let's translate. There's this kid, Joseph, and he's the youngest of 11 brothers, the sons of Jacob, who is called Israel in this version of the story. Brother number 12, Benji, or Benjamin, he'll be coming along later. And this wasn't Joseph's fault, but Dad loved him best, gave him that coat of many colors that you might remember. Joseph was smart, but also dumb. He could interpret dreams, but a lot of his dreams pointed to a future when his brothers would bow to him. Here's the dumb part. He told his already jealous bros about it. Hey, guess what? In my dreams, you're all going to bow to me someday. Not real smart. Well, one day, Dad says to Joseph, hey, your brothers are out in the fields working. Notice Joseph isn't working. They're tending my flock. Why don't you go out and see how they're doing? So when Joseph shows up, this is a chance for a family meeting. And the brothers meet Joseph with fists and feet, and they strip him down and tear his coat up and throw him into a pit. A well. They want to kill him. But Reuben, who's the oldest, is smart enough to say, hey, we are not going to kill our own brother. Reuben, best sandwich, best brother. But then Reuben goes away for a little bit, and Judah, brother number 4, gets the bright idea, hey, let's sell him into slavery. And they get 20 pieces of silver for him. 20 pieces, only 10 less than Judas one day would get for Jesus, right? And that's when it gets interesting. Remember Galileo? Most of us grew up with that lovely story of him climbing to the top of the Tower of Pisa and dropping 2 balls of very different size off the tower to show that they would hit the ground at the same time. An experiment repeated by the Apollo astronauts years later on the atmosphere surface of the moon with a hammer and a feather. And yeah, it worked. But while the Pisa story is probably an invention of his biographer written after his death, in 1633 Galileo came under fire for upsetting the picture of the cosmos the Catholic Church had gleaned from the scriptures. Using a telescope to survey the night sky, Galileo had asserted that the sun is the center of our solar system, that the earth orbits the sun and not the other way around. The church, scandalized by the notion that the earth was not physically the center of the universe, immediately forced Galileo to recant or face torture. Even though Galileo, now a free man, is said to have muttered as he left the courtroom, all the same, it moves. In 1992, 359 years later, Pope John Paul II officially declared Galileo to be correct. Duh. A declaration made all the more weird by the fact that Catholic priest and astronomer Georges Lemaitre had formulated the theory of the Big Bang years earlier. The Big Bang theory was formulated by a Catholic priest. A far more advanced notion than the simple idea that the sun is the center of our solar system. Nevertheless, 359 years later, Pope John Paul II welcomed Galileo back to the respectable side of church history. Be careful who you throw into the pit. Ignaz Semmelweis. Now there's a name you don't hear very often. Semmelweis was a physician and a scientist who noted that when a kind of fever called childbed fever broke out in maternity wards in his native Hungary, that the fatal disease was actually being spread by doctors. Doctors who would often do things like perform autopsies on children who had died from this disease and then go deliver newborns with the same hands. Semmelweis discovered antiseptic hand washing and noted that the occurrence of the fever in his maternity ward when doctors washed their hands dropped over 90%. For his troubles, Semmelweis was ridiculed in his profession. When he fought back, he was thrown into an insane asylum, beaten, and died 2 weeks later from his injuries at the age of 47. Meanwhile, his work has saved untold millions of lives. Be careful who you throw into the pit. Mahatma Gandhi was viewed by many as this weird little man who had the people of India fighting for their freedom by refusing to fight at all. He also believed in some things that made him the butt of jokes. He believed, for example, that one job, spinning, was essential to the Indian economy. He also believed that simple physical labor was important to the health of a person. So, for his own health and for the good of India, Gandhi would spend 2 hours a day spinning, even when matters of state were pressing. Gandhi refused to play the games of the British government. The press, which I think had kind of a love-hate relationship with Gandhi in Britain, once asked him, "How dare you go and meet our king dressed only in a loincloth," Gandhi's traditional dress? "The king," Gandhi replied, "was wearing enough clothes for the both of us." Ridiculed, called foolish, eventually assassinated, and now widely quoted and considered a pioneer in matters of the spirit and in the call for peace. A pioneer who got his ideas for nonviolence largely by reading the Gospels, proclaiming Jesus. Be careful who you throw. Well, I think you get it by now. Speaking of Jesus, remember Pilate's song from Superstar? "I dreamed I met a Galilean, a most amazing man. He had a look you very rarely find, the haunted kind. I asked him to say what had happened, how it all began. I asked again. He never said a word, as if he hadn't heard. And next the room was filled with wild and angry men. They seemed to hate this poor man. They fell on him and then disappeared again. Then I saw thousands of millions crying for this man. And then I heard them mentioning my name and leaving me the blame." Be careful who you throw into the pit. Joseph was an irritating inconvenience to his brothers. He didn't just upset the apple cart of their lives, he bowled it over. The youngest sons were not the ones to be lifted up. They were to serve the oldest in that time. They were not in charge of telling their elders how life would be. Joseph's brothers did not want to hear about the day when the pipsqueak named Joseph would be the one they would bow to. So they solved the problem. With fists, insults, a hole in the ground, and then the betrayal, sealed by 20 pieces of silver. But of course, Joseph didn't stay down in the pit or in slavery. In one of the most remarkable stories in human history, Joseph goes from slave into jail and then to the right hand of Pharaoh. And his prediction of a famine would save Egypt and in turn his starving family. And we see his incredible dream come true when his brothers, who have no idea at this point, years later, who he is, come to him as Pharaoh's chief officer in Egypt and bow to him, asking him to save their starving families. Be careful who you throw into the pit, just might save you. We live in a time when we are so divided. And I think this story speaks to our time. Our society fights a lot. And we're all probably guilty of metaphorically throwing others into the pit and out of our line of sight. But history teaches, as our Bible here is teaching us, that the gifts and insights of those who are despised today are often crucial to building a better future. And if we will reach out with our hearts and listen to each other, rather than judge, rather than despise those who upset our worldview, then we will be able to hear the wisdom that is being spoken. Wisdom that no one person or side holds exclusively, but wisdom that will, if it is wisdom, have an echo to it. The echo of the words of Jesus, of the kingdom of God. If we will only reach out with our hearts, stop insisting on seeing the world only as we see it. Stop insisting on who needs to be in charge, and start insisting instead that we have to approach our woes as family. We can get out of this famine. Let us listen. Let us love. Let us make God's kingdom and the rule of love the rule of our lives. And we will rise from the pit together.